Today we're very fortunate to have Shebo and Mbeelo in the studio. Shebo, you're an expert in participative reaction research. Can you tell us a little bit more of your work in that field?
Yeah. So first of all, let me thank you for having me here on the program today. I thought that maybe I could just talk briefly about myself. I am from Zambia, and if you're familiar with the Victoria Falls, Zambia actually houses a large part of the Victoria Falls. So in short, I'm from Africa. I'm from South Central Africa. I have a background in economics with public administration, but I'm also an alumni of Australia. So I studied at Edith Cowan University. I have a degree from Edith Cowan University in finance. So I did an MBA with finance. And later I went on to do a graduate diploma looking at research methodologies. And this is where I came across participatory action research, both as a methodology and a problem-solving approach.
Yes.
And then I later went on to do a PhD in business studies at Edith Cowan University, looking at the area of knowledge management within the Sustainable Development Framework. A lot of the work that I'm doing today in the African continent takes the approach of participatory action research.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about your thesis, Shebo, because it involved the knowledge management dealing with capacity building in the Zambian copper belt. Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes. In my thesis on using participatory action research, I looked at participatory action research from two perspectives. First of all, I used it as a methodology to solve a problem. And then I also looked at strengthening the approach itself, participatory action research as a methodology. Yes. So strengthening the methodology.
In more a development context? Or?
Yes, in a development context, but it could be used as a prototype in organizational change, in organizational development. So in terms of looking at it as a problem-solving methodology, I looked at a problem in the Zambian mining community. And the literature did state that there was a bit of dislocation and disempowerment of members of the mining community in Zambia following privatization of mining enterprise.
Yes.
So privatization of mining enterprise brings about a change in the context, and so it impacts on people living in the community. So I looked at that as the social problem.
Bit of dependency built in, perhaps.
Yes, and I said, well, in order to solve that problem, I needed to get the perspectives of the affected. And my affected in this case were a group of women aged between 45 and going as far as 77. And the reason why I chose these women is because they had a longer perspective of the mining community. These are women who had lived in the mining community before Zambian independence,
yes,
after independence, but also had experienced the era of privatization.
Yes.
And so their perceptions helped to shape my thesis as we began to try and look at ways and means of solving their social problem. So as a researcher, I stood apart from them and I was simply observing them. And the conversation, I only guided their conversations, but I think the problem was solved by themselves as a group of affected stakeholders. And I'm happy to say that through my thesis, these participants began to look at life from a different paradigm, from a different point of view, whereas originally when I started with my research, they were looking at life from a different angle. But with participatory action research, we were able to take stock of the context, so contextualize. We were able to deconstruct the context,
yes,
deconstruct the social problem,
yes,
analyze the fragmentations, the parts, reconstruct a new reality that then informed the decision-making process, their decision-making process. And this is how these ladies then began to look at life from a different perspective, in a more sustainable way in terms of how they made decisions in the community.
Kind of reduced dependency and rekindling of old skills and old knowledge that had been.
That's it. Yes, and that's it. So when I walked into the community, the first problem that I noticed was that there was a huge dependency syndrome. A lot of the members of the mining community had been very dependent on the fact that government was subsidizing mining enterprise.
Yes.
And so life was great until international companies came into Zambia to buy some of these mining enterprises. And a lot of people in the community were retrenched. So they were downsized. The companies were downsized, and so a lot of people lost their jobs. Some of them had not, for instance, changed a bulb, a globe. I think in Australia
Really?
you call them globes, because this was all being done for them. Many of them bought the houses that they lived in as sitting tenants, but some of them had never paid rates, for instance, to the municipal council. They didn't know what it was to own a house and pay rates. Some of them didn't even know what it was like to pay an electricity bill, a water bill. So in the dialogue, in the discourses, you actually heard some women say, in the first month of being owner of a property, their electricity was shut off because they had not paid their electricity, and that was a reality. That was a reality check. So in our conversations, we felt that it was important for us to be open and honest about our situation, to allow an organic process to take place and help us begin to solve our problem and seek sustainable solutions. Within the group of women that I interviewed, or rather engaged, there was one voice that triggered the whole change process. And this was a woman who was slightly different from the rest in terms of her resilience and eagerness to progress. So this was a different voice from the dependency voice that I was hearing earlier on.
Yes.
And it was this voice that was then the trigger that got the others to begin to think differently, to begin to realize that, dependency was not sustainable, that they needed to step out of the box and begin to look at life a little bit differently. 15
years later, you find yourself as a Deputy Commissioner with the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. How does participatory action research fit into that scenario?
Yeah. So Scott, I am the Deputy Coordinator for the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CAADP. This is Africa's common policy and investment framework for agriculture and food security in the continent. All of our member states, 54 member states of the African Union, are supposed to implement this framework, the CAADP framework. How have I linked the framework and its processes to participatory action research? It's quite interesting that I'm able to do it because my PhD thesis is about participatory action research. The CAADP framework is a framework that looks at changing the way business is done in Africa's agriculture sector. Towards the close of the 20th century, a lot of challenges in the agriculture sector are noted. And so the heads of state and government of the African Union decided, look, we need to revisit our model of doing agriculture. We need to bring in a model that allows us to invest effectively. We need to bring to the table the range of stakeholders who are involved in agriculture, to dialogue with them together in order for us to identify priority areas in which we will invest. Yes. So the scenario at the close of the 20th century, I beg your pardon, was that there was a huge top-down approach to doing agriculture in Africa. And you had two major players, mostly the public sector, your governments, and the partners, the development partners that brought in of course, the investment into the sector.
So maybe it's sort of dependency, but on a larger scale than in the Copper Belt, or just a massive legacy of dependency.
It wasn't really a legacy of dependency. What I'm saying is that you didn't get a lot of the stakeholders who are at the bottom contributing to the direction of the sector.
Right.
They were more at the receiving end, and this was not sustainable. So what the CAADP framework encourages is an opportunity for all stakeholders in the agriculture sector to contribute to the one agenda that will ensure sustainable development in the agriculture sector.
Across all your member countries?
Across all the member countries. So my role at COMESA is to facilitate the implementation of that framework in the 19 countries that are members of COMESA. Now, the framework encourages governments to increase their budgetary allocation to the agriculture sector. Now, that entails change. Governments that have not been allocating up to 10% of their national budget to agriculture need to change.
Yes.
But it takes a while. This cannot happen overnight, and therefore you need some kind of change agent going into these countries to begin to get them to see the importance and the value of bringing agriculture back to the center stage of their economies. So what countries normally do is that they would take what is called a stock taking of the sector.
Yes.
And that is part of participatory action research. It's part of contextualization, taking stock of where you are, understanding the status quo. But this is done with the affected, the beneficiaries of the program, who are the farmers, women, your youth, your researchers and academics, your private sector people, your development partners, and of course, government is a very big stakeholder in this agenda.
So bringing in knowledge, ownership, commitment, the social and intellectual capital, if you like, is brought around one table.
In fact, ownership is the key. All those stakeholders have to believe in the fact that they own that agenda, that it is led by them, it is owned by them. And so those become very, very important issues. So after the stock taking of the sector is done, we then do what is called evidence-based analysis. And that is where the knowledge management aspect comes in. So you've taken stock of the sector, you've collected your data, you've collected your information, you understand the trends in the sector, you understand who the key players have been in the past, where have we gone wrong, where have we gone right. Let's do some kind of modeling into the future. What do we think are the areas in which we should invest over the next so many years, 5 years, 10 years,
yes,
in order for us to get a return on our investment. And the return on investment that has been projected per country is that the sector should grow by 6% per annum. The agriculture sector must grow by 6% per annum.
So participatory action research is helping you gather all that energy and commitment and also hard-won resources contributed from each government to make something bigger and better happen in
exactly.
the African context.
Yes. So participatory action research involves an iterative cyclical process. It's an iterative cyclical process. So you identify your problem. And so the problem at the close of the 21st century was that there were challenges in the agriculture sector. Productivity levels were low. Intra-African trade, low. Investment in the agriculture sector was low. We lost our extension services at the close of the 20th century. High food import bills, we were importing heavily.
Yes.
When Africa has the potential to grow its own food. So that contributed to the big problem scenario. And then you take stock. Okay, you take stock of your sector, then you analyze, then you define your programs, then you implement. So that's all part of the cyclical process. Problem is identified, you take stock of you contextualize and take stock of your project, of your situation. You then do an analysis, identify where you should invest, and through your programs you begin to invest, and then you later on evaluate.
So it's based on collective knowledge. It's not just data. It's not just secondary reports or economic modelling. It's real people with their chunks of knowledge to contribute to the broader picture.
Yes, it is an organic process. It is continuous dialogue with the stakeholders who believe they have ownership of the process. You're allowed to go back and revisit and re-evaluate steps in that iterative process. You have the larger iterative process happening when countries develop or design what are called national agriculture investment plans, and these have a lifespan. In the CADA processes, countries are expected to design a national agriculture investment plan that has a 5-year, 6-year, or 10-year lifespan. But within this big iterative process, you have the smaller evaluations happening, monitoring and evaluation, changing, revisiting, organically ensuring that you are meeting the objectives of the bigger iteration.
Shebo, thank you very much for your time and your input. That was a very enlightening interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on there.